Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to start with greetings to the COP President, Dr. Sultan bin Ahmed Al Jaber, Badr Jafar, COP28 Special Representative for Business and Philanthropy and Chair of this forum, CEOs from the worlds of business and philanthropy, heads of states and ministers, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my sincere honor to open this important discussion. I would like to say a special thank you to the COP28 presidency for inviting the Africa Finance Corporation as delivery partner for this session. It is an honor to collaborate and bring attention to a subject I'm passionate about, which is harnessing natural capital for net zero. This subject speaks to the four key pillars around which COP28 has been organized, namely fast-tracking emissions reduction, increasing adaptation by focusing on nature, lives, and livelihoods, fostering an inclusive transition, and last but not the least, paying for it all by mobilizing climate finance. Africa's tropical montane and mangrove forests, along with the Amazon and those in Southeast Asia, are described as the world's lungs. They are a vital solution for emissions reduction. We need to rethink our relationship with these carbon sinks that store billions of tons of the world's carbon dioxide. I'd like to share with you three key messages which I hope will shape today's conversations. We're all aware that the world is not on track to meet its net zero targets, mainly because we have not deployed enough capital for the transition and also because we have not done enough to reduce emissions. It goes without saying that the current approach has not delivered meeting these goals require an urgent new approach, which is going to be focused on partnerships, collaboration, and innovation, and more open-mindedness about what we're trying to solve for and how we can work together to arrive at the required solutions. What's required going forward is a significant mindset shift that is focused on collaboration and partnerships to align interests that will enable pragmatic solutions. Collaboration and partnership will foster the technological and financial innovation that we need to overcome these challenges. My first message is that we must examine the logic of the rules which govern carbon markets, with a focus on conserving and expanding the role of nature-based systems that have proven to work, and to make sure that they can work continuously and potentially increase their scope for absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We need to come up with a fair system that places an appropriate value on the critical roles that forests in Africa and other regions play in sequestering carbon dioxide. It is imperative that we create incentives for the preservation and expansion of existing forests as they are our surest cost-effective method of emissions absorption today. So we know that today, carbon markets are mainly for offsets, and there are two markets. We have the voluntary carbon markets and the regulated carbon markets. And there's a significant divergence in the price of both markets. And if we look at really what we're trying to achieve, which is carbon dioxide, absorption, we know that industrial chimneys, it will cost $100 to absorb a ton of carbon dioxide. We also know that it will cost 10 times that amount if it's already in the atmosphere. We know that there are prices of carbon traded in regulated market of 100 to 1,000, depending on who is doing it. And we know that for the African forest, it's mainly, $2, $3, $4, $5, all below $10 per ton. That clearly is not how a market can operate. And we have to think of how to create some kind of convergence in these two markets. And it's only through a proper discovery process with a proper value chain in place that we can accomplish this. We must link emissions target to per capita emissions. We must also link emissions reductions to per capita emissions. This is the only way we can ensure fairer outcomes as historically low emitters who have contributed least and bear the brunt of the consequence cannot be asked to make the same trade-offs as high-polluting economies. As Africans, we must take ownership of this challenge and play a leading role in charting a clear and effective path forward for the continent that balances our demographic peculiar development needs with our vast natural endowments. At COP27, or leading to COP27, we presented a white paper on Africa's pragmatic path to net zero, where we argued for the need to localize circular economies that would foster the energy transition, working on abundant renewable energy sources in Africa, as well as the vast mineral sources that we know exist in Africa. And this is based on the premise that in Africa, we have 40% of the minerals and metals that are required for the energy transition. And Africa alone is reputed to have 60% of the best solar sources globally, with significant wind hydro capacity across the continent. So it only makes sense for us to process those minerals and metals that are required for the energy transition in Africa. We also argued of the need for us to build resilient infrastructure on the continent, and we've put out a fund to help make that happen. We've also discussed about financial innovation, the need to find a way of bridging blended capital with blended capital using concessional capital and commercial capital. So this forum that has brought business and philanthropy together is very important on how we can shape the future working together. We recognize that natural capital requires an additional element, which is philanthropy. Conserving the forests, mangroves, and grasslands that make up our vast carbon repositories require collaboration between governments, communities, philanthropy, and private capital. At this Business and Philanthropy Climate Forum exemplifies this approach. By blending philanthropic capital with public and private capital, as well as innovation, we can realize the full benefits of forest and land for carbon capture. Critically, ensure that the benefits of local communities and governments that are their rightful owners get the benefit of this and are partners on this journey. Which is why today, as we announced in our new report for COP28, we are creating a new Africa Finance Corporation Foundation with primary focus on climate action. AFC Foundation would raise knowledge and awareness to halt destruction of our carbon sinks and raise financing for conservation. AFC Foundation will work hand in hand with partners and our project development and investment teams at the AFC, leveraging our deep experience in bringing projects to life, de-risking projects and bringing them to life, to create verifiable projects that are required to preserve our natural capital. AFC Foundation will work with the African Union, African governments, and other partners in creating the carbon value chains required to establish and verify reliable and transparent carbon emissions reductions targets. Only then can we scale high-integrity projects through the global carbon markets. What can we achieve together? We must find a way of working with communities. We must find a way of working with governments. We must find a way of creating a common framework for us to work across the continent in this value chain that we need to build. We must find a way of getting the skills and expertise that are required on the continent for us to have an effective value chain for this program. Again, our main, I would say, forte and how we've distinguished ourselves in infrastructure finance and industrialization in Africa is in de-risking the opportunities that will allow us to distribute bankable projects to partners and ourselves. We think that we can do the same for the carbon markets, and we're happy to collaborate with partners to get it done. We think that it is important that we find a way of starting afresh in a way that we focus on really the objectives of reducing carbon emissions. I would like to introduce the moderator for the panel, who will introduce his other colleagues. We all know James Wangi, the co-founder and CEO of Africa Climate Ventures, who is very passionate about this subject and has actually gone a long way in raising awareness on the need for change on this subject. James has been a champion of inclusive and sustainable growth around the world for more than 2 decades. One of the founding partners of Dalberg. He had worked in McKinsey. He's a 2009 Archbishop Desmond Tutu Leadership Fellow at the African Leadership Institute and serves on the Institute's board. He's also a young 2013 Young Global Leader at the World Economic Forum and currently serves as the Program Advisory Committee of the Clinton Global Initiative. Please welcome James Wangi, and co-founder and CEO of African Climate Ventures. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samaila, for really grounding us in the conversation we're about to have about natural capital, and importantly, the imperative to get to a measure of coherence in our approaches, integrity in the underlying climate outcome, and inclusion of the populations that are doing the hard work of stewarding mankind's most precious assets. For that conversation, I cannot imagine a better panel to engage on this conversation than the colleagues I'm about to invite onto the stage for hopefully what will be an engaging conversation about how we generate the type of momentum around natural capital that we so urgently need. So without further ado, I'll call upon Ms. Anna Howry, co-founder and CEO of Respira. Margaret Maggie Kim, CEO of Gold Standard. Peter Fernandez, co-founder and CEO of Mombac. And Mr. Arif Rabik, chairman and founder, Bamboo Village Trust. We will also be joined, it is in the nature of COP that people are running between sessions. We will also be joined by Her Excellency, the Honorable Minister Arlette Soudan Nuno, Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development and the Congo Basin of the Republic of Congo. She will join us in the flow and we will just integrate into it, but I will now transition onto. And Anna, we will start with you. At the end of the day, a good chunk of the challenge, at the heart of the challenge of really incentivizing the preservation and indeed the expansion of natural capital is getting to markets and incentives that work. This has not been an easy year for the carbon market community in a range of ways, particularly around the questions of both inclusion and integrity. What is it that an audience like this in a business and philanthropy forum, why should they engage in that market, and how should they go about doing so in order to actually have the impact we need?
Great, thank you for the question, and thank you for, can you hear me? I need to put, oh, right, there we go. It's great to be here today, and thank you for the question, and thank you for hosting us today. So the private sector plays, I think, a really important role in unlocking finance for natural capital. Corporations are responsible for 40% of emissions. Every year, compliance, carbon markets only cover 25% of all global emissions. The emission gap is getting wider all the time. I think it was announced today that countries' NDCs will only meet 11% of the emissions that we need, and these need to be closer to 25 to 50%. So what do we do? Because every year the clock is ticking and we need to take action now. We need to take action fast and we need to do a lot more of it. And carbon markets are one very effective way of enabling us to do that. They're available in the scale and at a really cost-effective price at the moment. Obviously, we need that price to get, to become higher, and we need higher carbon pricing. But they're available to us now. Corporations are putting in place, to a greater or lesser degree, their own decarbonization pathways, but they're not meeting those decarbonization pathways fast enough. In many cases, because they can't, we've got hard-to-abate sectors that we've already been discussing. But the role of the corporation is, yes, to reduce their emissions. But in the meantime, they can also invest, and they can invest in the voluntary carbon markets. Climate doesn't care whether an abatement or mitigation or reduction or an avoidance takes place within its own value chain. It cares that it actually takes place. And so corporations can reduce towards their own corporate net zero, but by also using carbon credits along the way, they're also making a significant contribution to global net zero. And that's what we need to do. And I think that, they've been so beaten up. I mean, we've got leaders like Apple and Microsoft and others who are being really proactive. But that number of corporations who's taking climate leadership is small, and it needs to be a lot bigger. And there's been quite a lot of research now that has been published that sort of shows that companies who use carbon credits are actually decarbonising at twice the rate than those companies who aren't. So it is a really important tool in the armory that we have available to us, and it has impact right now.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And one of the things I take away from that is, of course, one of the big concerns out there is the idea of moral hazard. That companies that are, quote unquote, buying offsets are almost getting these papal indulgences to go out and emit. What you're saying is actually the companies that are doing the best job of cutting their emissions are also the leaders in the market for carbon credits. But I guess a big part of the challenge here is the integrity of these credits, and to what extent are they actually delivering value to people at the grassroots. Maggie, at Gold Standard, kind of maintaining that level of market integrity and quality, and indeed taking on board the question of equity as part of what you're charged with. What are you observing?
Obviously, integrity and equity run in the DNA of Gold Standard. So we've been around for 2 decades trying to ensure environmental integrity and sustainable development impact in the carbon markets. And we've seen a huge change in the last 2 decades. The carbon markets 20 years ago is certainly not the carbon markets today. And we are at a critical juncture really trying to understand what that future looks like. And going back to Mr. Zubairu's speech, it's quite important we get that clarity, not just for the African leaders, but also for the demand side, the corporates who are buying or claiming the impact. So Gold Standard's been thinking about this quite a lot, advocating for the leadership that we stand for. We're known for our safeguarding principles. We're known for maximizing and requiring sustainable development, because at the end of the day, carbon credit, and we shouldn't be led by the carbon credit, but each carbon credit has a story behind it. It's about a family, it's about a community, it's about bringing that sustainable development impact to those communities that are affected by these projects. So I think it's quite important, but people ask me, what's the future? What's the integrity and what's the future of this carbon market today? I don't have the magic ball, but what I know is in the times of confusion, in the times of need for clarity, we need to stay ahead of the curve. And the only way you do that is to deliver on highest integrity projects. So for us, we recently issued in Africa, in Rwanda, the very first Article 6 aligned credit under one of the cook stove projects. And we're really proud because the government of Rwanda authorized this project and it follows the Article 6 rules as extent as possible. So those need to take place. And instead of saying we need new frameworks, I think we need to harmonize in understanding what a good carbon impact claim means.
Yeah.
And I think Gold Standard's role is to really support the project developers and governments to make sure there's that alignment, that understanding, and the capacity has to be built.
Yeah.
Locally, so.
Yeah, there's a powerful tie-in there to what Mr. Zubairu described in terms of investing in quality, homegrown developer capacity, and just the general infrastructure. But before we go on, I am thrilled to welcome the Honorable Minister Arlette Soudan-Nuno. Welcome. Thank you. Honorable Minister, thank you so much for joining us, and in what must have been is already a very busy moment in the process of the COP. We do appreciate your presence here. We particularly appreciate the critical role the Republic of Congo and indeed all of the countries of the Congo Basin are playing as one of the world's biggest kind of net carbon sink today in terms of net removals today. There was a recent Three Basins summit that happened, that you hosted, and a lot of conversation about how we begin to invest there. And I think there's a question. We began the conversation on how to make sure that the carbon market and economic incentives actually reward the work of countries such as your own. What are you seeing as both the opportunities and the pitfalls of that? And I know that you will be working through an interpreter, so please proceed.
It's free. Oh. Je vais parler. I'm just speaking just a little. She's stay next to me. For all people is here, no understand French. May I speak in French, okay?
S'il vous plaît.
Voilà, merci beaucoup. Je suis la
Thank you very
ministre, comme vous l'avez dit, de l'environnement, du développement durable du bassin du Congo. Mais j'ai une double casquette. Je suis également la coordonnatrice des 16 pays du bassin du Congo.
I am the Minister of the Congo Basin, Environment and Sustainable Development, but I also a double cap. I am also the coordinator of the commission, Technical Commission of the Congo Basin.
Et cette commission, c'est une institution sous-régionale de l'Union africaine.
This commission is a regional institution of the African Union.
Et nous constituons donc ce poumon vert, le bassin du Congo, cette région que vous connaissez. Vous connaissez souvent les forêts du bassin du Congo.
So we are representing Congo Basin. You know the forest of the Congo Basin.
Mais notre urgence, c'est que les forêts séquestrent 1,5 milliard de CO2, mais nous avons les tourbières, en peatland en anglais, qui stockent 31 milliards de tonnes de CO2.
So we have in the forest of Congo the peatlands that are stocking, that are keeping.
Les forêts séquestrent 1,5 milliard de tonnes de CO2.
So they are sequestrating 1.5 billion tons of CO2.
Et les tourbières, 31 milliards de tonnes de CO2 de stock.
And the peatlands, 31 billion tons of CO2.
Pourquoi je parle de séquestration pour les forêts et de stock carbone pour les tourbières? Tout simplement parce que ces écosystèmes particuliers des tourbières ne peuvent pas se restaurer. Autant on peut faire l'afforestation pour les forêts, elles se restaurent, mais les tourbières, c'est un phénomène naturel de l'anthroposage de feuillage.
So I make a difference between the forest and the peatland because the peatlands is a natural phenomena that is sequestrating carbon.
Ils stockent, ils ne séquestrent pas. C'est un stock.
That are stocking carbon when the forests are sequestrating carbon,
Tout
right?
à fait. Qu'on peut restaurer les forêts.
And the forest can be restored when the peatland cannot because it's a natural phenomenon.
Donc nous courons après cette urgence à préserver tant les forêts que les tourbières. Pourquoi?
So this is a real emergency to
Preserve.
preserve the forest and the peatlands.
Pourquoi? Parce que tout simplement, il nous faut aujourd'hui savoir que rien que les tourbières, c'est 3 à 4 années d'émissions de gaz à effet de serre de la planète entière.
We have to understand that the peatlands are 3 to 4 years of carbon emitting of all in the world.
Et on ne peut aujourd'hui, le bassin du Congo, c'est en fin de compte le rempart de l'humanité parce que c'est le bassin qui est le séquestrateur net zéro de la planète aujourd'hui.
And the Congo Basin is really the wall of the carbon production because it's really the one sequestrating the more carbon in the world.
Donc je veux saisir cette opportunité vraiment qui m'est offerte
I would like to take this opportunity today
pour revenir sur le sommet qui s'est tenu fin novembre à Brazzaville, le sommet des 3 bassins.
to come back on the Global 3 Basin Summit that happened in Brazzaville.
C'était le sommet du bassin de l'Amazonie, le bassin du Congo et le bassin du Bornéo-Mekong, Asie du Sud-Est.
It was the summit of the Amazonia, Borno-Mekong of Southeast Asia, and Congo Basin, Central Africa.
Un Mekong.
Yes, Borno-Mekong, Southeast Asia.
Pourquoi? Parce que les 3 bassins représentent 80% des écosystèmes forestiers de la planète.
And they are representing all the basins, 80% of the
Free basin, not all, free basin.
the 3 basins are representing 80% of the
Des écosystèmes forestiers de la
of the
planète.
forestral ecosystems
Forestiers.
in the world, forestral ecosystem in the world.
Voilà. Et nous représentons également un quart un quart de la biodiversité mondiale.
We represent 1/4 of global biodiversity.
Et aujourd'hui, nous ne pouvons pas parler de la préservation des écosystèmes, des ressources naturelles, du climat qui change sans la prise en compte de ces 3 gros écosystèmes mondiaux.
And today we cannot speak about climate change and restoration without involving those 3 basins. 3 basins, yes.
Mon pays, la République du Congo et la République démocratique du Congo,
My country, the Republic of Congo, but also the Democratic Republic of Congo,
nous partageons ces tourbières, ces peatlands,
are sharing these peatlands
sur une superficie de 165 500 km².
on a stage of 165,000 square kilometers.
Respire, respire. C'est pas un interprète, il faut l'applaudir parce que il fait ce qu'il peut avec moi. C'est pas facile, hein.
Thank you so much.
Voilà. Et c'est un de mes collaborateurs qui est polyglotte. Il parle plusieurs langues et de temps en temps, il me dépanne comme ça. C'est vraiment quelqu'un de bien.
Thank you, Madame la Ministre. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Et donc, je disais, j'ai pas terminé rapidement, que parce que pour lui permettre de souffler un peu. Voilà, je disais ceci, qu'il se dit, elle parle anglais, elle paresse, elle veut pas parler, mais bon, ça lui fait aussi une répétition, c'est bien. Et je disais ceci, nous avons besoin de vous. Nous ne pouvons pas venir ici. Je suis en retard parce que j'ai été faire l'inventaire du bilan mondial.
So I really want to say that we need you. I was a bit late today because I had to do the inventory of the global resume bilan.
Et moi, ça fait 7 ans que je suis ministre de l'Environnement, 7 ans que je coordonne le bassin du Congo.
It's been 7 years that I've been Minister of Environment, 7 years also that I'm coordinating the Congo Basin.
Et je ne comprends pas les différentes conférences des partis sur le climat ou la biodiversité.
And sometimes I don't understand the different conferences on biodiversity.
Nous tournons le dos à ceux qui, vous venez de le comprendre, sont les régulateurs du climat mondial.
We are turning the back of what you understand are the regulator of global climate.
Nous faisons beaucoup d'annonces
We are making a lot of announcements,
financières,
funding announcements also.
mais je ne vois pas où va cet argent, puisque moi, je suis là depuis 7 ans et je ne vois pas où va cet argent.
But it's 7 years, we've never seen where is the money. So we're asking where is the money?
Donc, nous ne pouvons pas vouloir tout et le contraire de tout.
We cannot want something and the contrary.
Parce que, in fine, nous nous mentons à nous-mêmes parce que nous sommes tous condamnés à vivre sur la planète Terre.
And we are lying to ourselves because we are all condemned to live on this earth.
Lorsque nous disons qu'il nous faut... L'un des points forts de Brazzaville, ça a été la conciliation du droit de l'environnement, du climat et de la biodiversité qui sont intrinsèquement liés.
One of the key points of Brazzaville declaration and Brazzaville results of the global summit was the synchronicity between biodiversity and
Sustainable Development and Environment.
and sustain. Yes, it was really the synchronicity between biodiversity and sustainable development.
Et aujourd'hui, nous avons identifié des projets à financer qui sont issus de nos contributions nationales déterminées.
And we identify a few projects that are from our CDNs
Et qui n'attendent qu'à être financés. Comment financer une transition énergétique? On nous demande à nous, pays pétroliers, de nous désengager des énergies fossiles. Mais comment aller vers une transition énergétique si vous n'avez pas d'argent?
and we really look to make fundings for this project because how can we go to the end of fossil fuel and polluting source of energy while we don't have the money for funding our projects?
Tout ce qu'on nous demande de faire, nous le faisons. L'Afrique, ce n'est que 4% des émissions mondiales.
Africa is only representing 4% of the global emission.
Mon pays a un taux de 0,056% de déforestation.
And our country has a rate of 0.056%.
Vous
of
comprenez que même
deforestation.
lorsque nous faisons notre contribution nationale déterminée, on n'est pas concerné puisque nous ne sommes pas des émetteurs.
So you understand that we are not really concerned because we are not emitters.
Mais vous entendez dire atténuation, atténuation, d'accord, mais donnez-nous des fonds d'adaptation.
So we are every time we are speaking about attenuation, about mitigation, but we need to have implementation funds.
Nous rendons un service écosystémique à la planète.
We are really giving a service for the planet, of ecosystemic service to the planet.
Et je ne sais pas comment expliquer ça, c'est un paradoxe. Beaucoup ici ne connaissaient pas le bassin du Congo. Vous voyez que c'est assez curieux. Pourtant, c'est le régulateur de ce climat mondial. C'est le dernier rempart de
And
l'humanité.
it's really discomforting because many people doesn't know about Congo Basin and all the numbers of mitigation that the Congo Basin is responsible for.
Cette fois-ci, nous avons eu le soutien d'Antonio Guterres, le secrétaire général des Nations Unies,
This time we had the
pour
support
le sommet de Brazzaville, qui a mobilisé toutes ces agences
This time we had the support of Antonio Guterres
pour essayer de
General
réduire
Secretary.
cet écart, de cette injustice climatique.
to try to fill the gap of this injustice.
Nous avons un fonds, le fonds bleu pour le bassin du Congo,
So we have a fund, a funding instrument, the Blue Fund for Congo,
qui a été monté avec la Banque mondiale, le programme des Nations Unies pour le développement,
which have been built with the support of the World Bank.
toutes les garanties maintenant pour permettre à tous les partenaires de travailler avec un outil en toute transparence.
So now we have all the guarantee to reassure the partner to work in an environment of
Mais
transparency.
qu'est-ce que nous constatons?
Yeah.
On fait beaucoup d'autres projets financiers pour éviter que l'argent revienne directement à ceux qui régulent le climat mondial.
Yeah.
And we're doing everything we can to
C'est la même
regulate
chose pour les États insulaires qui disparaissent à vue d'œil. On attend qu'ils disparaissent pour crier « Oh, ils ont disparu
It is the same thing with the island nations that are really ». disparating.
C'est la
and
même chose qui se
with the
passe du
waters.
côté du Sahel avec la désertification et
Same
la
with-
grande muraille verte.
Same with the Sahel and desertification.
Toujours pas de financement 20 ans après cette grande initiative.
So even 20 years after this initiative, still no
Donc
funding.
voilà ce que je pouvais dire dans un premier temps. Vous voulez savoir comment nous aider. Nous avons des projets, des programmes qui sont issus de nos contributions nationales déterminées. Nous avons besoin d'un renforcement de capacité building. Nous avons besoin d'un transfert de technologie. Donc, il nous faut la ressource financière pour mettre tout ça en exécution.
So this is what I wanted to say firstly. If you want to help us, we really need we need capacity building, and we also need funding for our projects.
Yeah. And crucially, thank you so much for firstly navigating and I know that the interpreter is both interpreting and is trying it for the first. It was really well done, smoothly.
Thank you so much.
The content. Thank you. And I think the point you've put so squarely on the table, Madam Minister, is we always talk about these big natural capital assets, how valuable they are. Every year there's the rhetoric, and yet many of the countries that host these assets are providing this free service to the world are in grinding poverty because it's all talk, no investment, no development of economic value. Peter, you spent years in the world of technology and business, building up, highly profitable startups in the tech space. You've pivoted to natural capital. Is it possible to actually generate meaningful value from these assets and solve or address the kind of dynamic that the Honorable Minister is talking about and get to prices that actually reward and generate economic opportunity for the communities that host these assets?
Thanks, James. Yes, definitely. So my company, Momback, is a Brazilian company, and we operate a fund called the Amazon Reforestation Fund, which is a $100 million for-profit fund with investors like Bain Capital, AXA, the French insurance company, the Canadian government through their pension plan. And what we do is we reforest large pieces of degraded cattle pasture in the Amazon with native biodiverse forests in order to remove carbon from the atmosphere and to increase biodiversity and to help avoid the Amazon tipping point. So far, we have generated roughly $150 million worth of revenue from the sale of high-quality carbon removal credits. Our team is 25% PhDs and is 100% focused on executing carbon removal through native biodiverse reforestation at the highest level of quality and integrity possible. As a result of this focus, we have been able to generate a price per ton of CO2 removed of more than $50. We've never sold a credit for less than $50 a ton. And this is allowing us to generate something like 15% net IRRs on our reforestation projects, which are, as you can imagine, very capital intensive. And so what we're looking to do now is scale, right? We've raised $100 million, we've generated $150 million in revenue. The next step is $1 billion invested, and so on and so forth. There's a very large opportunity to execute reforestation in the world. Reforestation is actually currently the single largest opportunity available to humanity to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And so, we hope that we're showing that it's possible to get the prices that make it profitable, which is what it's needed to make it scalable.
Great. So it is possible, particularly on the reforestation side. One of the things it doesn't address, of course, is what about those countries that haven't deforested to begin with? What about those guardians of existing stock of carbon, of existing assets that are still drawing down carbon in terms of forestry? And I think there is an underlying question there about the structure of the markets, and Mr. Zubairu called it out, that in a sense, if I wanted to boost my country's attractiveness for programs, I should actually encourage some deforestation. It's my economic incentive to do that. And for countries like the Congo that haven't done that, you're kind of left out in the cold a little bit. I do want to focus on another aspect of this, though, and Arif, this is where I want to bring you in with your work at Bamboo Village, which is, all right, Peter is giving me hope that we can move from the $5 a ton world that Samaila described earlier to a world that actually begins to reflect some of the value of our biodiversity and our forests. But can we actually get that to the communities? Can we actually build? You've talked about the restoration economy. What is that, and how does that work if we're trying to bring that to life?
Yeah, so just setting the context, as Peter said, and Honorable Minister said, nature does the best solution at climate change mitigation till this point. Okay. And we have more than 1 billion farmers across the tropics who can actually be the custodians and be empowered to be the climate champions to activate nature, but they're not. And that's because of lack of inclusivity. And lack of inclusivity is not because of lack of intention, but it's a lack of the systems, social systems, economic systems, and ecological systems being integrated into one system that does make money, that hopefully you can sell a ton for the right price. I won't go there. And so, from the Bamboo Village initiative, which started in Indonesia, and now we're in 12 countries, and hopefully going to spread all across the tropics, we believe that it's about social forestry assets. We need to give the land to these people, not in a right, because tenurial rights are tricky, they're long, they're hard, but tenurial access. We can give 100 years of tenure to activate the private sector of the world to invest in these billion-plus farmers in every single context of ecosystem and landscape, and have in Kenya an amazing old farmer, with a bald hill in the distance, and he can look at that hill and say, oh, that's owned by the government. I can apply for that land, and I can plant a forest on that land that will give my family dignity and security until my great-grandchildren. Once you do that, once you can achieve that transformation in his mind, you've created a transformation shift. You start that inclusivity system. Yeah. And so what we talk about is bamboo as a turbo boost for agroforestry systems. And we need to understand the bamboos of all the ecosystems of the world. Bamboo is a giant grass that can sequester 50 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per year. And there are many plants out there that can do that. If we had time, I'd take you through bamboo yoga, and we'd do the motions of absorbing 50 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per year. We suck up from the roots 5,000 liters of water into the rhizomic network of the bamboo, right? So nature is amazing. Biodiversity is amazing if we are the custodians of it and truly can empower it. So how can we do this? We believe it starts with the tenure, and then it's about buying, purchasing. Yeah.
So we've heard now from everyone on this panel, and I do want to invite one last comment each. We've got about 7 minutes, it will be about a minute from each of you, concluding with the Honorable Minister's reflection. And I'll start with you, Anna, right? We've just been reflecting a little bit on the different aspects of it, both the challenge for countries that are providing this free service, your call to action for the markets, and so on. Sitting at Respira, what do you hope will be different going forward about the market than it is today?
We really, in order to, sort of provide the capital that is needed, that has been highlighted by Madam Minister and the rest of the panelists, we really need to unlock the demand. Corporates need to step up to the plate. Nature can provide, natural climate solutions can provide 30% of the mitigation potential that we need, and yet it only receives 3% of climate finance. How to be a CEO in a climate crisis, that's what a lot of the audience are, and there is no business in a dead planet. So we really need to essentially use every tool in the armory, and the voluntary carbon markets and carbon credits are one route for that. I think my other comment would be, increasingly, you don't often get the private sector saying we want regulation and let's make it mandatory, but we're sort of hearing a lot more of that. So let's make it mandatory, because if we're not going to do it voluntarily, and it shouldn't be voluntary, we should be doing it, then the call would be to, essentially to governments and policymakers to make it mandatory.
Yeah. That sounds like a call for more rigorous standards, tighter compliance, really using some of the tools, Maggie, that you're working on. Are there tools we're not bringing to the fight that we could?
I think we need to, especially, it's always a great pleasure to share the floor with you, Madam Minister. I think conservation cannot be looked at a carbon tunnel vision. So how do we come up with holistic solutions that blends both mitigation and adaptation solutions, and what are some of the innovation, like the case that Peter introduced, what are the innovative funds and blended vehicles that can come to the table? Because I asked the ministers, no one thinks about carbon markets all day. I think about it from morning to night, but not all of us do. So instead of sort of having that carbon tunnel vision, how do we bring that holistic finance approach to conservation? Because it's going to require philanthropic money. It's going to require different thinking from the corporate sector. So, and finally, Africa's leadership, I think that's where it really can flourish, because Africa has been a leader in driving that innovation and change. So how can we increase the capacity locally so that you're ready to really showcase that leadership and build it sustainably going forward? Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Peter, everyone's eyes popped at the kinds of prices you're realizing. How scalable and globalizable is that? You're in one of these critical 3 basins, and what will it take to really make this a global movement for nature-based removals?
I think it's super scalable.
Yeah.
We have to have 10 billion tons per year of CO2 removal by 2050. That's not going to happen without a giant market to pay for it. Yeah. Like, it's binary. Either we're going to have a market to pay for it, and we're going to pay for it and we're going to have it, or we're not going to have a market to pay for it, and all of that carbon removal will not get done. And without that, there is simply no way to keep the world from heating up more than we want it to heat it up. So I believe that the demand side is coming along quite nicely. I actually think that one of the things that's missing is being customer-centric. Like, we were able to generate some of those prices by using the customer-centric sort of practices that a tech company uses. And I don't see a lot of that entrepreneurship in the carbon market, and I think we need a lot more of that. But I do believe the demand side is coming along quite nicely, and I think that the demand for high quality carbon products in general, not just removal, is already orders of magnitude larger than the supply for high quality, right? So I think that that tool is there and we need more entrepreneurship. My big request is actually also for regulation. The biggest problem I have selling is like, well, what's gonna happen if this law changes in your country, or if this other law changes in my country, or if Article 6 gets implemented in this way, and what about corresponding adjustments? Yeah. I wish all of that was already solved, and I hope it gets solved soon.
Guess we'll need to solve it. Arif, you talked about an army of 1 billion farmers around the world. Can they be mobilized on this? Are you seeing, paint a picture of success on mobilizing this key demographic who we typically think of as the poor victims of climate change? What does it look like to bring them into the field of battle, if you will?
Yeah, so I mean, to Peter's point before, I think the price is very important. One bamboo village as a social forestry asset for carbon is 100,000 tons of CO2 every single year, right? At $2 a ton, that's $200,000. At 50, that's amazing, right? We can really empower. So we need to get the pricing right. We need to empower these communities with all the support and resources that they need. And so, private sector, can we talk to governments in a way of activating the degraded lands of the world as an investment opportunity, right? And understanding that the work will be done by these communities. So we need to incentivize them. And so grants in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per plus or minus 2,000 hectare area are critical so that these communities can take the time, 1, 2, 3 years of planning from a champion to 200 households, thinking about how they can plan and manage and bring forest products and really activate an economic system that is a restoration economy, right? And we need more demonstrations, we need more centers of excellence all around the tropics on this. And that's how we'll do it.
All right, thank you. Madam Minister, I'll end with a question to you, which is, we've talked, bizarrely, you've got the private sector saying regulate, create the frameworks and so on. What are governments such as your own able to do to encourage the emergence of this type of market and opportunity? And what are you already doing?
Nous, en tout cas, merci une fois de plus. Je tenais déjà à remercier tous les panélistes qui sont là.
I would like to thank all the panelists present here.
J'ai découvert des solutions basées beaucoup sur la nature avec l'initiative sur le bambou.
I discovered many initiatives that can really make the change.
J'ai vu des propositions sur le renforcement des capacités.
I've seen propositions on capacity building.
Sur l'achat et la vente du carbone également.
On buying and selling carbon.
Nous sommes, nous, au niveau de mon pays, au niveau du gouvernement, en train d'aller vers une loi du marché du crédit carbone qui soit en conformité avec l'accord de Paris.
For the government, for our government side, we are working on a law that can really implement the regulation for carbon, just carbon markets in agreement of the Paris Agreement.
Et pourquoi? Nous ne pouvons pas constamment avoir un marché volontaire qui est un Far West pour moi parce qu'il n'est pas régulé.
So we cannot stay on the voluntary market because it's really not regulated.
Et alors que nous sommes pays partie de l'accord de Paris. C'est assez absurde de vivre ça comme ça depuis l'accord de Paris.
When we are members of the Paris Agreement, so it is a bit absurd for us.
La tonne est à 5 ou 8 dollars selon le rapport de force avec l'État.
So it's $5 to $10 the ton regarding the states, the report with the state.
Et nous, aujourd'hui, nous voulons accéder au marché de 70 dollars à 150 dollars en conformité avec l'accord de Paris, l'article 5 et l'article 6, 2, 3, 4 points.
And in conformity with Article 5, 6 and 2, we want to sell in the sovereign markets for $70
Donc,
to $100
je suis en train de monter des textes sur le plan de la souveraineté locale et sur le plan du bassin du Congo. Nous sommes également en train de légiférer sur des textes pour que nous soyons une force pour négocier ce carbone de l'accord de Paris.
So we are really working on texts, on legislation, to really be to really have a strong voice in the negotiation, rightfully good negotiation, because we are a member of the Paris
Et
Agreement.
donc j'ai besoin vraiment, si on peut rester en contact,
And I really want to stay in contact
pour
with the
que
panelists,
vous puissiez nous accompagner dans le renforcement des capacités.
so you can really support us in the capacity
Nous, on a
building.
beaucoup de bambous, mais on ne les exploite pas de la même façon.
We have a lot of bamboo and we don't exploit it in
Vraiment.
the same
Et
way.
vraiment, c'est enrichissant de tout ce que j'ai vu comme transfert de connaissances ici. Si vraiment les organisateurs peuvent nous laisser ensemble pour que nous portons une initiative commune, j'apprécierais vraiment beaucoup.
And this transfer of competency is really interesting for us. I will really appreciate to stay in contact with you guys.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so
encore.
much.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Thank you, Honorable Madam Minister. On that very action-oriented note, I want to invite Rita Nzanze, the Chief Economist of the Africa Finance Corporation, to close us out with a few words as we transition. And thank you to all of you, panel,
Merci.
for your perspectives, your wisdom, and some of the challenges you've put on the table for us to think about.
Thank you, James. And thank you very much to our amazing panelists for such an enriching discussion. I just wish we had 2 hours and not only one. Good afternoon, everyone. Mine is actually quite short. I'd just like to start by sharing a compelling story about a project that we at the Africa Finance Corporation are passionate about, one that has profound implications for our planet. So the Madame Ministre spoke about Central Africa and the Central African basis, but a little bit more to the west. In West Africa, there is somewhat of a startling reality, which is that nearly 90% of this region's rainforests have disappeared in the last 5 years, mainly due to logging, subsistence agriculture, and the collection of firewood for something as basic as cooking. Nigeria is at the forefront of this crisis, losing over half of its primary forests, the highest rate of deforestation in the world. In this context lies the Ngel Nyaki forest in Taraba State, northeastern Nigeria. It's not only the home of the critically endangered Nigeria-Cameroon chimpanzee, but also a region battling poverty, where local communities struggle for basic needs, making this forest vulnerable. Yet over the past decade, a remarkable transformation has unfolded. Ngel Nyaki is regenerating, aiming for a 6-fold increase in carbon sequestration. This is the achievement of the Nigeria Montane Forest Project, NMFP, which for 20 years has balanced conservation with community support. This project was included in a 2021 study in the scientific journal, Nature, of high-altitude forests in Africa, which found that these montane forests store more carbon than the Amazon, underscoring the global significance of such ecosystems. At AFC, we've partnered with NMFP, aiming to replicate this model across Africa. However, a glaring irony stands out. Despite its massive carbon removal potential, Ngel Nyaki and many other carbon sinks across Africa, like it, are disconnected from current global carbon markets. And this brings us to a critical question. How can we responsibly integrate Africa's, Latin America's, and Asia's powerful carbon sinks and put them at the heart of the global carbon market? Integrating these powerful natural carbon sinks benefits not just companies like yourselves, seeking high quality, high integrity carbon offsets, but also local communities, biodiversity, African countries and their economies, and the global climate. Our year-long exploration into these questions culminates in a policy report that I'm honored to launch today, entitled How Africa Can Unlock World's Most Promising Net Zero Solution. There's a QR code that will remain on the screen, and I encourage you all to take a copy of the paper on your phone and read it. But I'll give you some very quick key highlights from the report. So the first is the urgent need for innovative solutions in our faltering global carbon market, Africa's vast carbon sinks as untapped resources for carbon capture, AFC's commitment to developing quality, nature-based carbon removal efforts, as the CEO alluded to earlier, the necessity of restructuring global carbon markets to ensure Africa's meaningful participation, the importance of making local stakeholders the primary beneficiaries of global credits, of carbon credits, and AFC's twin strategies, developing a pipeline of sustainable carbon reduction projects and conserving our natural ecosystems. Our goal is to establish an authentic, high-quality carbon offset market for Africa that creates a value chain benefiting both the continent and the world for generations. So I hope that you'll join us in this crucial journey. Thank you.